What is the distance between curiosity and result?
Oh, I love that.
If you can shrink that time, you can really just like non-linearly change the outputs of any analytical system. dbt originally did that by shrinking the amount of time you had to wait to like develop pipelines. You could do it yourself. Fine. AI, I think, will continue to shrink this, both because the next step between having a question and getting an answer is not like sit down and write a bunch of SQL. It is like the AI can probably do a pretty good job of that for you. Like maybe you have to check it, but then you move even one level of abstraction up and AI becomes a thought partner. You start to be able to ask it not just what questions, like how many questions. You can ask it why questions. Like, why do you think that this might have happened? And with enough metadata and metrics hierarchies and these kinds of things, I think we can actually get analysts to a place where they're like running a Socratic process of, interrogation about the business.
Tristan, I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for joining.
I'm really happy to be here. The reason I'm laughing for everybody in the recording is that I remember being stressed out before my first board meeting. And it was because we'd never had a board meeting for 4 years in the company's history, and we can talk about that, blah, blah, blah. But I thought there was like some magical incantation that you had to say like at the beginning of a board meeting. I'd been at a bunch of board meetings before, and different people said like, I officially bring this board meeting to order. And it's kind of the same way, like when you start a podcast, like how do you start it? You just say like, hi, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. Well, Tristan, if you haven't checked out the Analytics Engineering podcast, Tristan is a podcast expert, more than me. So
I'm getting there.
One of my favorite shows. Well, this is a fun one for me because I'd love to hear about that first 4 years in board meeting story, because I don't think I've heard that. But this is a fun one for me because I would say I know you and dbt pretty well. I used to work for Tristan at dbt starting in early days when it was called Fishtown Analytics. And I'd actually love, before we talk a little bit about what's on your mind today and infusing AI into the organization, I'd love to talk about those early Fishtown days, just to give some context on dbt. So just a refresher, you built a data consultancy, you built dbt as an open source tool for yourselves. You didn't really expect other people to use it, let alone for it to grow into this widely loved community, venture-backed company. So I've actually never asked you this, but do you remember the exact moment or the exact room and decision when you decided we're pivoting from having this consultancy and we're going in on growing dbt into the product it is today?
I don't think there was a moment. I think that in many... Okay, so there's a leader in your portfolio that I respect a lot, Barry from Hex. Barry says things like, I decided that. And like he starts sentences that way. And I never really start sentences that way. There are like a few points where I put on the CEO hat and I say like, okay, everybody, like we're doing a thing. But there's some, we've never, Netflix has a great way of talking about their decision-making process. And I think we need to get better at talking about our own decision-making process, but we're not tops down. We're also not consensus-based. It's like this continual circling around a thing until everyone's like, yeah, shit. That's what we got to do.
That's what we got to do.
And there were like a million data points here that were really all kind of bubbling up in 2019, but it was really just this increasing. The community at that time had been consistently growing at 10% month over month every single month for, I don't know, like 3 years at that point. And the like really noteworthy thing that was happening was that enterprise customers or large enterprises were showing up and saying like, hey, I want to do dbt, like help me, I can pay you money. And we were like, we literally can't take your money, we have nothing to give to you. And so we just it felt obvious.
It's still a big decision, right? It's a big personal decision. It changes how you spend your day, and that, you have board meetings 4 years later. So how did you open that first board meeting?
I kind of didn't. I was just like, hi.
Hi.
Anyway, let's get
Welcome
started.
to the board meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're totally right in terms of like the way that it changes the way that I spent my time. I mean, the way that all of us did. But I remember one of the biggest points of nervousness that Lenny from Amplify and it had when originally leading the round. He was like, look, you really have to stop doing consulting. And I was like, but Lenny, we make so much money off of this. It's how we minimize our burn. He was like, you have to stop doing it. And he didn't really care that much about it. Like he was like, me personally. So I spent probably 50% of my time doing like pure client work when we raised that round. And he was like, really, you have to stop. And it made me sad, but I did have to.
I think that was the right decision, even though, like the DNA of consulting and really getting what people needed and what people wanted is what led you down this journey. So we establish everything we'll talk about later. What was DBT then at that moment in time, and what is DBT now?
DBT, in let's just say DBT 3 years in, which was July 1st of 2019, was an open source command line tool that did data transformation. And it really enabled people to apply software engineering best practices to the process of data transformation and learned a lot of lessons from Terraform and DevOps. It had catalyzed a small open source community around it. And the community was a group of people that were all like very self-conscious about the fact that they were growing and doing something new for them. And they knew that DBT was allowing them to level up their careers. And so there was a lot of positivity in this group of people, which I think is one of the things that made it so unique. Like everybody was like glowing about the product and also about their membership in this like kind of community of early adopters. Today, DBT is in use by over 50,000 teams. It is we DBT Labs as a company are coming up on 500 employees. It's a lot. And yet it is so few. There's a lot more to do. The product has the core like data transformation tool, the open source offering has continued to evolve and mature. It's like API surface area is increasingly well defined. And we have built a pretty like increasingly mature platform on top of it that we call DBT Cloud that both helps you operationalize the open source, like open source DBT core, but it also is what we call a data control plane that combines observability and orchestration and cataloging and semantics and all of the stuff that you need in a mature data ecosystem to like do data right.
Yeah, I love this kind of concept of data control plane, and I think that's spot on. One of the things when I looked a little bit at some of DBT Labs messaging and marketing, even though it is the same core tool and it expands what you can do with the data control plane over time, but I looked at the website and I saw that one of the things that is written is Gen AI runs on data and data runs on DBT. And a few years ago, there wasn't as much discussion about Gen AI from customers and in the ecosystem. So I'm just curious what you're hearing. I remember we got dinner over a year ago and you were saying that you were spending time studying and learning more about AI. So what motivated this interest personally and from a customer perspective?
Wait, you have to tell me. I'm going to turn around for a second. What does the back of my sweatshirt say? Does it say? No, it doesn't. I have the wrong sweatshirt on. I have a shirt that has exactly that line on it. But it's, you build software infrastructure. You have to find a way of explaining the value of the infrastructure that you build. Because, okay, if you build a CRM, it's like quite straightforward how the CRM impacts your business. It literally runs your sales team, and your sales team closes all the revenue. Like, okay, cool. That's very straightforward. When it's always been, and maybe it always will be, challenging for me when I like go to a party and somebody says, "Oh, what do you do?" Like the first two answers are like pretty straightforward. It's like, "Oh, I run a software company, and oh, it does data stuff." And then if they ask like what data stuff, I'm just like,
You're like, do you want the 5-minute answer? Do you want the 3-hour answer?
Right. And so Gen AI runs on data runs on DBT is a way of saying that DBT is data infrastructure that powers all kinds of downstream use cases, and Gen AI is certainly one of them. But we, in that first box, that box where you put Gen AI there, we also put lots of other things. Like it works just as well as if you say business runs on data runs on DBT, and so it's a nice way for us to talk about the role that DBT plays.
Are you seeing some pull, or has there been any surprising way that customers want to use DBT in their workflows? And I understand at the end of the day, it is data. So maybe you use it in a RAG pipeline or in something else. But what is the pull of the market and of your customers? How does it look different in the last year and the last 2 years than it has before then?
It's very hard for me to look at the kind of top line numbers and say like, this percentage of people are using DBT for this thing versus this thing. Like, right. And here's the best that I can give you on this. Two things. The first one is that we did a survey early in the year. We do it every year. It's called the Analytics Engineering, the State of Analytics Engineering. And it's like 1,000 responses, something like that. And we asked the question, does DBT power downstream AI workloads? And there were two answers that were essentially yes, and there were a couple answers that were no. And the one of the answers was yes today, and the other one was we will be in the next 12 months. Yep. And if you sum those,
a plan.
You're like, we have a near-term plan. Yeah. So the sum of those, like yes and yes in the near term, was 55%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I was like quite surprised by. If you had told me the answer was going to be like 15 or 20%, I would have felt like, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. But that was like legitimately exciting to me. And that means like we've been in the hunt for like customer stories over the last year that we're like, okay, tell us what you're doing. And we were very fortunate to get Yannick Mistelli on stage at Coalesce last week, who talked a little bit about the Roche's AI use case that's downstream of DBT. But the other thing is that we have, and Andreessen Horowitz wrote about this in at least 2021. It might have gone back to even 2020, where there's this kind of bifurcation in the data ecosystem between, back then it was described as the analytics ecosystem and the machine learning ecosystem.
Those worlds, in my observation, have been pretty separate.
They have been. In analytics, we call it data transformation. In machine learning, we call it feature engineering. Mm-hmm. And you ask, like, what is the difference between those two things? And the answer is like, well, mostly it's that the tools are built with slightly different developer experiences because it's a different set of people doing the stuff, but it's like kind of the same job to be done. But anyway, as DBT gets more and more popular, we hear more and more frequently data engineers and machine learning people saying, I'm building my feature store with DBT.
Oh, interesting.
Which is like not a thing that we heard in 2020 or 21.
Well, I spend a lot of time with heads of AI and chief data officers and people who are trying to build AI in their organizations. And something that I hear very frequently is that the biggest priority is still we'll call it like data engineering broadly, but that
Mm.
can encompass different things, including analytics engineering. And so the data wrangling and management of getting the data prepared is still the bottleneck. And in the case of AI, the things that you might do to prepare the data look different, but the nature of getting the data prepared for AI or for some use case is still a big chunk of what, a subset of AI engineers, the titles might change, are doing. I don't know if that's what you're seeing too, or if that resonates at all.
Yeah, the big new thing is AI, like distinctly differently from both analytics and machine learning, cares a lot more about totally unstructured data. Whereas really both both analytics and traditional, quote unquote, traditional machine learning really cared about structured and semi-structured data. And so one of the things that the DBT workflow is not really meant for how do you gather up 1 million PDF files and shove them into a data lake. Like that's not really our stock and trade. And that's okay. The question then becomes like, okay, well, how do you take structured data that has an incredibly high bar for accuracy and trust and feed it into an AI pipeline? Like one, technically, how do you do that? And two, like what downstream use cases does that power? I don't know. I can say more about this. You want to?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more. So what has been the result of wondering about that in that exploration?
So the first part is like quite unsatisfying to me. I've asked like lots and lots of like people who are at the center of this ecosystem, what is the right way to feed structured data into large language models? And by and large, the answers I get are like quite unsophisticated. They are things like use one large language model to create a long paragraph or like many pages of text out of the structured data, essentially like turning really well-structured data into text and then feed it into another model, feed that prompt into another model so that it can then get correct answers on a downstream task, which seems silly. Like we have to take this, like we've worked so hard to get this in an exact format, and then we have to take that and like put it into English. There's also the
and lose some accuracy on the way there potentially.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of people are doing text to SQL and trusting that the large language model is going to, if it needs context, just go to the database, understand the schema, write its own queries, and pull the. And that's just like really not working from an accuracy perspective. But just people are kind of doing it anyway because it seems like the best that anyone. It's the best conventional wisdom that everybody has access to.
What do you think is the barrier to that? I hear people often use the intern test, which is, could you put an intern in this environment, a smart intern, and they can figure out what to do with it? What I mean by that is a lot of the problems that we've seen in data management is maybe I pull a query, but it's not the right table, or the table is out of date, or I don't have perfectly labeled columns and I don't know exactly what to select. And so there's just a ton of metadata that is either imperfectly captured by the organization, or like I don't have access to it as if I'm doing something as simple as text to SQL. What do you think needs to happen to actually make that work?
I think it's the wrong construct. I don't think text to SQL. Well, it depends on what the bar is for success.
Yeah.
If the bar for success is like mostly correct, if it's 80, 90%, like okay, maybe we can get enough metadata shoved into all the different edifices of a database, and that'll work. But like in at least in the use cases that I'm focused on, which, one is like the internal analytics use case where like a dashboard needs to be viewed and it has to actually be 100% correct, or the like downstream AI use case where like you are either powering directly a customer interaction or you're powering a human who is using the interactions you're having with the AI system to interact with the customer. Like that shit has to be correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't think text to SQL is the right way to think about it. From my perspective, it is the thing that's being missed there is the social like consensus layer. Is like in an organization, you can't just like look at a database and know how to calculate a metric. You have to go around and like talk to all the different people who are stakeholders in this metric and say like, hey, can we all agree on how we're going to collectively measure this? Because there's not actually a right or wrong answer. There's just like the way that we've collectively decided that metric should be defined. And so I think that you have to actually take those definitions, store them in code, and then allow the LLM to do that. And it's what we call a semantic layer.
I was going to say, it sounds like a semantic layer.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about dbt Copilot in the spirit of kind of using AI to help you do a data job and accuracy being really important? What is dbt Copilot and how do you make sure that it works the way that you want it to work?
Yeah. So we think about our AI investments in three ways. One is like our internal operations and in investing in AI to make ourselves better. The two product areas are dbt for AI and AI for dbt. And so far we've mostly been talking about what I would consider to be dbt for AI. So how does dbt fit into an AI pipeline? The AI for dbt is how do we use AI to accelerate what we are calling the analytics development lifecycle. So the entire lifecycle that you need to go through when you're building mature data pipelines. And the dbt Copilot is how we are referring to all these set of capabilities that allow you to accelerate that workflow. So it's super easy. When a dbt graph is primarily made up of data transformations, and a data transformation has potentially many inputs and has exactly one output, and it's a table or view in a database. And so it's very well defined, like what a quote unquote dbt model is, and there's like many examples publicly on the internet of like how to build a dbt model. And so it's actually not that hard for us to say, write me a model that does the following things, and it is, again, in the Copilot context, you do not need to have 100% accuracy. You need to have, enough accuracy to be a useful accelerant for that person's workflow.
And the reason why you don't need 100% accuracy is because you have someone who knows what they're doing.
There's a human in the loop.
Spending time and looking at the output, and they get the data and they know if this is right or not.
Correct. And there's a lot of while I think that the ability to actually author model code is important, I think that, you were referring to the metadata before. I think that the bigger impact will be on all of the surrounding artifacts. So tests and documentation. I think that we will see the overall code quality of dbt projects increase significantly because we can just automatically generate tests for a model, and test coverage right now is one of the biggest problems with dbt projects because people just like literally don't have the time to go through and define them.
There are manual things that you need to do as an analytics engineer, whether it's writing tests, whether it's writing documentation, and you can have good systems in place in the org to make sure people are doing it. But if you can make it easier and do it well, the quality should go up.
Just really quick.
Yeah.
As you were just talking, I was remembering the conversation that we had, I don't know, a year into your time at DBT Labs, where you and Drew and I were walking along
like somewhere in Philly.
The elevated train in Philly that's like now our small shitty version of the High Line. But we were talking about how, you know, at the time I think you were building out our metadata platform, and we were like, at some point we are going to have a catalog that we've built on top of this thing. Have you followed the progress there? Like that has actually become reality.
I have. Yeah, it was very exciting. I don't know if you still have my like jumbo catalog doc internally.
Oh my God. I'll have to look for it in Notion. It's a Notion doc?
It's a Notion doc, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, metadata is so important. Metadata is at the center of everything. Like if you can create a flywheel that is, at the center of it is consistently higher quality and more complete metadata, you are going to help all of the stakeholders in data, from AI engineers to business users. That like every single person benefits from it.
I'm curious about two things based on what you said. So one is you talked a little bit about this analytics development lifecycle and some of the things that AI can really help with, like testing. What in the lifecycle do you think is most susceptible to being augmented or automated by AI? And are there parts of the ADLC that you think AI won't really help with?
No, I don't think that there's anything that it won't help with. I think that the role to play in different parts of the ADLC is different. I would say that the area that I hope can get most automated is the operations stage, which is really like you have running pipelines in production. Sometimes they have failures. Why did they fail? What do we need to do to fix that? And I think that this is one of the benefits of having a framework. If you kind of build data pipelines just by like opening up a new Python file and typing "hello world," is very challenging for an AI system to reason about like the ways in which that is going to fail. But DBT fails in very predictable ways and gives you very clear error messages. And GPT-4o like knows a lot about those error messages and what causes them. And so I think that it is not going to be so far into the future that we are able to notify you and say like, here's exactly what's going on here. Here's like an English language description of like what the problem is. And then beyond that, like, what do I need to do to correct that problem? Like maybe you just give it a check mark and say like, cool, go do it.
Well, this is an example of AI for DBT. How right now are you building these AI for DBT initiatives? I know that you have Copilot and it's out in the world. Do you build a Tiger team that works on it? Is it coming? Like, how does that actually come to life?
So, as in so many things at a messy, high growth startup, I don't know that our process here is one to emulate, but I will say that the one thing that we've done really right here is that we took my co-founder Drew and we took everything off of his plate and we just said, this is your baby, go figure it out. And Drew is both one of the most like knowledgeable people in the world about like the set of customer problems that we solve, and but also he's also an incredibly prolific hacker and can just like build working prototypes of things very quickly, which is I think exactly what you need when you get AI products off the ground. Like the how do you get to something incredible is you don't sit around and plan out something incredible. You say like, well, what is the least good thing that I could possibly ship and how quickly could I ship it? And Drew's very, very good at that process.
Now that you've shipped it, do you have a more formalized team built around building DBT Copilot?
We're building that team now. We have a handful of people there, and we're staffing it out. Yep.
I need to. I'll find Drew and I'll interrogate him more. But you mentioned there's a lot of data on DBT models that are out there. Anything that you can share on how you used data to power DBT Copilot?
We did not have to do. We did not have to do pre-training or fine-tuning. We're using vanilla OpenAI APIs.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's great to have lots of training data already included in the internet corpus. And then most of the experimentation that we do internally is focused on what context we need to feed into the prompts and how exactly do we find the tasks. And I think soon we will start digging into more chain of thought type stuff. But right now, we've been able to see pretty good results from
like few shot examples, docs APIs.
It's like not that complicated to get pretty decent acceleration here.
Maybe don't need 100% accuracy because you have the DBT experts playing with the models. But how do you know before you ship it out into the world that it's working reasonably? It helps that you have a lot of experts on the team who can play around with it. But do you create an evaluation data set? How do you know it's good enough?
Yeah, so it is not a coincidence that we launched Copilot at Coalesce, and we also launched a new set of functionality called Advanced CI, Continuous Integration. And so a part of the ADLC is making sure that you can actually safely ship code to production. And so not only will Copilot help you do that by writing tests, but in reverse, Advanced CI will make sure that any new data sets that you push to production, you'll be able to look at the old version and the new version side by side and diff the individual rows between those two versions.
Got it. Okay, cool. We've talked about personas before and you've written about personas publicly. I'm just thinking about that specific person who's going through and shipping the model and going through CI and looking at the diff. And so some of the personas that you've outlined are the engineer, the analyst, and the decision maker in the data org. I know that you think the superstars have all of these skills, but maybe they spike somewhere. How do you see AI reshaping these personas? Is there one that is more or less, I don't know if AI resistant is the right word or can be helped with AI more? Just how do you think about even the future of those data teams over time?
Okay, I'm going to give you a take. And it's an optimistic take.
Okay.
And if Ben Stansel ever listens to this podcast, he will criticize me for being too optimistic. But those are the roles that we play. Sorry, Ben. So data engineering is, my belief, too low leverage today. I think we have too many people doing things that essentially amount to duct taping different solutions together. And that's everything from moving data from place to place to making sure that multiple different open source systems, blah, 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 blah. My belief is that AI will allow these folks to operate at a higher level of abstraction and to manage a much larger, more comprehensive data estate, but not linearly grow the headcount of the data engineering team along with the amount of real estate that they're governing. Also, data engineers would not need to do the next set of stuff up. They wouldn't need to constantly be fielding tickets about why did this fail and how do I add a new field. Then at the analyst level, I think that. So I've been using a term for a decade now, which is my guiding light for all product development decisions. It is analytical cycle time. So what is the distance between curiosity and result? And
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
if you can shrink that time, then you can really just like non-linearly change the outputs of any analytical system. And so DBT, originally did that by shrinking the amount of time you had to wait to like develop pipelines. You could do it yourself. Fine. AI, I think, will continue to shrink this, both because it will not the next step between having a question and getting an answer is not like sit down and write a bunch of SQL. It is like the AI can probably do a pretty good job of that for you. Like maybe you have to check it, but yes, you can. But then you move even one level of abstraction up, and AI becomes a thought partner. You start to be able to ask it not just what questions, like how many questions. You can ask it why questions, like why do you think that this might have happened?
Yeah.
And with enough metadata and metrics hierarchies and these kinds of things, I think we can actually get analysts to a place where they're like running a Socratic process of interrogation about the business.
Yeah. And these are interrogations that happen today with the data team and other, people ask for the data team's opinion on why things happen, or maybe the sales team has context or the engineering team has context on a bug that took down a system. So that why lives really across the organization. Can you get another thought partner as part of that discovery process?
Totally. And the ability of an AI to reason about how like causal links across the organization is, I think, going to all be about metadata and what are the relationships between different parts of the machine and the metrics. And then on the decision maker side, like I think that there's just going to be a complete. We've been talking about self-service forever, and like it's so people are so sick of talking about it because really it's just been like used by vendors to sell a dream. And everybody kind of understands roughly what that dream should look like, but nobody's ever really manifested that in reality. And this is not me trying to say like, well, DBT is going to unlock self-service. It's more that like AI coupled with like a mature data ecosystem has the potential to unlock self-service, and that would be a relief. I would love to one day retire and like we don't have to talk about self-service anymore.
I agree with you. I think everyone's been talking about self-service and sort of like democratizing access, and there have been steps taken there, but it's just really hard to do. And we are missing the metadata to do that accurately today. So we talked about AI for DBT, and it sounds like, observability may be part of that, code gen for data modeling and SQL testing, documentation. There's a lot there that can potentially be aided with AI. I'm curious, AI is sort of this hot topic today. Are there other trends that you're really excited about in DBT land and we can get into you saying that the modern data stack is dead, but just largely for data practitioners that you're spending time thinking about?
So just to go on record, I never said the modern data stack was dead. What I said was that the modern data stack is not that useful of an idea anymore. But partially because like
because it's so alive. It was the opposite. So I did disservice by giving the tagline.
Well, in some ways it just kind of won and we've moved on. But in other ways, there's a real fatigue from customers of building a stack of 7 to 12 different products together that finally net you a business result at the end of the day. And so that one of the things you see in our data control plane theme is that customers are pushing the vendors that they work with to do more, and that the modern data stack was in part a commitment by an ecosystem of vendors to all be focused on best of breed and sell together. And yes, you construct a stack by buying a bunch of different things or installing a bunch of things. So yeah, I think that era is kind of behind us, and we're bravely marching into a new era.
Tristan, I'm going to ask you something before we get back to other trends that you're seeing. Just, I know you invest in a lot of early stage companies, and right now AI is maybe having its moment. So I'm curious if there are any parallels that you're seeing as the modern data stack becomes more mature today that maybe you would advise folks or that you would think about when looking at the AI stack that has a lot of activity, has a lot of new startups that are coming out, building for different parts of the AI infrastructure stack.
Yeah. I say this with all the love in the world, but I think that early stage AI companies are overvalued today. And you know, I'm an investor in honestly many of them. Um, the Certainly there's a tremendous amount of enterprise value to be created in the AI technology wave, and you know, I would not. I don't have a strong opinion on people saying things like the AI wave is the biggest tech wave ever. Like that may be true. I also don't think anybody has really the ability to measure that kind of thing. But the problem is that there's just so many companies, and I think that everybody is overestimating their own moat, overestimating the willingness of buyers to buy like many different products. I think that many of these products are actually features and will be consolidated into single platforms. My guess is that the way that happens in AI is going to look different than the way that it happened in data. It's like really interesting to watch how OpenAI is moving forwards here. Like they're building a platform differently than Databricks or Snowflake or AWS have built data. Like every generation does it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So this is not me being bearish on AI. It's me saying like there's probably just a lot too many companies in the space today.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that there are parallels. Like there is a big,
totally
momentous opportunity, like in modern data stack. We have cheap cloud storage and compute. It unlocks faster analytical queries. And then there's an ecosystem built around it. And everyone wants a slice of that pie. And so there are a set of problems that folks go out and solve. The question is like, which problems are large enough to be sustained over time? I think it's similar right now. Foundation model APIs, like engineers have access to these LLM models. It's certainly not a perfect analogy, but it expands the pie of possibility of what you can do with them. And
totally.
Everyone also wants a piece of that pie, and there are a set of problems. I think in the case of AI, the problems can become obsolete much. I'm certainly not an AI bear. I'm very bullish and very excited, but there are a set of problems that may be problems today, tomorrow, even a year from now, but not 3 years from now, or not large enough to be a company on their own.
Yeah, I think the rate of change in AI is very challenging. And so yes, there was a bubbly moment in 2020, 21 in the data ecosystem. I think that there's a lot of similar characteristics today, but it is magnified by the rate of change and probably the larger market opportunity overall.
I also think a lot about other, we talk a lot about semantic layer, but part of semantic layer, so now you have the infrastructure to actually get accurate data when folks across the organization are looking for it, but you have to define the right KPIs. Like you have to get the right data into the semantic layer. And I think about that, in AI, everyone's talking about evals and systems around evals, but you have to evaluate the right thing. And in some ways, that's a problem on steroids because you also need the data set to support it. So I think there are a lot of lessons that people in the AI world can take from modern data stack world.
Totally.
Okay, so back to, what's on your mind that's not AI? Obviously, I brought you on here to talk about AI, but I know that is not where you spend all of your time.
Yeah, honestly, I think the biggest thing happening in data right now is open table formats and the catalogs that are behind them. It's, I was just talking about how what I would consider to be kind of the top end of the infrastructure stack, the like cataloging, observability, orchestrate, all this stuff is I think kind of starting to smash together. But weirdly, at the same time, the very bottom layer of the infrastructure stack, the table format, the catalog, and even some people are hypothesizing about the query execution layer has the potential to like follow this trend, but they're delaminating a little bit, and that is really interesting. The fundamental the fundamental thing I think that is going on here is that prices or like total spend on data infrastructure has gone up significantly, and there are multiple credible, like really first-class data platforms out there, Databricks and Snowflake, plus all the hyperscalers have one, and you could probably name a couple others as well. And as the spend increases and as the bifurcation in the market increases, you have teams that get stuck on different sides of the divides inside of a company, and they often feel like they don't have a lot of control over how they're spending money and how they communicate with the other parts of the data estate inside of an organization. And so the like very obvious solution is just like, well, why don't we just all store our data in an S3 in a common format, and everybody, all the different platforms can read from the same data. That is like in practice, like quite challenging to achieve, but that is like kind of the problems, and that is like where Iceberg and Hootie and Delta are kind of like driving us towards, I think, in a really good way.
I'm curious what you think about Databricks' acquisition of Tabular, given we talk a lot about standards across the ecosystem. You talked about it right now with Iceberg. Does that change anything? Or I could see like pros and cons argument for that just advancing usage of Iceberg. And of course, there are alternatives too.
Certainly. I think that I think that Databricks is on record as saying this, and I think that we should like believe them when they say it, that their acquisition of Tabular is an investment in this version of the world, the like open data version of the world. And I think that's incredible. I think that Snowflake also made big moves here, supporting an open source catalog called Polaris. To me, the big thing is, can we actually drive the ecosystem towards consistent support of a standard? And honestly, I don't even really care that much about what the standard is, but open data doesn't really work unless everybody supports, all the different platforms support the same standards. And that's all about incentives. Like there's a lot of reasons why data platforms might not want to support open data standards. And that is, they want the ability to lock in customers and continue to drive more consumption.
I was about to ask what you think happens to warehouse vendors in a world where you can basically like automate compute triage.
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question, but I do think that it would be very hard to imagine a world where this trend doesn't make the ecosystem more competitive.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that is good for everybody. Thing. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Well, maybe I'll ask one more question on the standardization. How do you see that, just because we're in AI world, how do you see that feeding into AI? Like one concrete thing I could see is potentially more access to large data lakes. But my understanding is it's also does not natively support, I'm not an expert here, but does not natively support multimodal data, or it's mostly structured and semi-structured. So curious if you see any tie between this standard being more ubiquitous and AI adoption.
Yeah, I think that while you certainly see all of the major data platforms wanting to also be able to address AI workloads, and I think in many ways pretty successfully, the AI ecosystem is just moving so incredibly quickly that if you want the most flexible possible technology ecosystem, you want direct access to your own data. And so all of the structured, highly governed, 100% accurate data in an organization had previously been locked up inside of a single API, whatever data platform it was behind, and you had to use the compute for that platform in order to get access to it. And now that's increasingly not going to be true.
Tristan, this was awesome. I always learn so much from you and appreciate the hot takes. I'd love to wrap. We started with your first board meeting where you're like, how do I start this board meeting? I'm just curious, in your own words, how have you changed as a leader and as a person since starting DBT Labs, or at the time, Fishtown Analytics?
Oh, thank you. This has been a fun conversation. It's a good question, and I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that before. I think my answer, and maybe this is, I think I'm very fortunate to be able to give this answer, but at the beginning of the journey, which was 8.5 years ago now, I was looking for a way to make my mark on the world and feel like I did something that made people's lives better. And at some point along the journey, I feel like I've ticked that off my own personal bucket list. And certainly there's a lot more to do, but I no longer feel like I wake up every day saying like, how do I prove to the world that like I can create some value? And that creates so much space to elevate other people. And so the way that I think about, success today is, who have I created space for? Who has become successful because I've helped them become successful?
That's beautiful. I love that answer. Thank you so much, Tristan.
Thanks,
and
Bar.
Great to see you as always.
Yeah, you too.